Hello fellow tarot nerds, this is going to be a Q&A video for you, comprised of some questions that I would consider to be frequently asked and others which I've asked you guys to throw at me. I asked you to leave a comment after my last video, firing any questions you have at me. I've asked over on Facebook. So altogether I think I've got the makings of 3 or 4 Q&A tarot videos at this point. I'm going to answer 10 questions per video in the hope that it doesn't go on for too long and become too rambly. So without further ado, I'm going to read question 1. Have you ever experienced a client telling you that nothing you said made any sense to them? Excuse me, my medication makes my mouth very dry. The answer to that would be no. I've never experienced that. When I was younger and I first started dabbling with tarot around the age of 13 or 14, some of the resources that I was using were probably very traditional and very stuffy and not really very relevant. So, for example, the Queen of Swords would have been interpreted as a cold, bitchy, aggressive woman making trouble for the client in their life. Something like that. Something that's very broad strokes and is way too specific to be relevant to everybody and doesn't really allow for any intuitive insights. And as a 13-year-old girl, I probably did go ahead and read the card according to that very stuffy, strict definition. And as a result of that, there probably were quite a lot of raised eyebrows from the family members that I was using as guinea pigs at that time. But I was young, so, they probably let it slide. These days it doesn't happen at all because I'm very clear with my clients about what I do with tarot, about the kind of reader that I am, and about the fact that tarot is merely just a tool in order for me to use my spiritual counselling techniques. I do insist upon a very strong dialogue with the client. I insist upon knowing their backstory, what they feel about which areas they'd like to focus on, why they're coming to me for a reading, so I can get a really good sense of where I need to direct my energy to and how I need to gear the messages of tarot towards their issues. Now, once that dialogue has been established, yes, of course, intuitive insights will come to me, and they very regularly do. This doesn't mean I'm psychic, it just means I'm human. It happens to everybody and it happens all the time. It's no magic trick. But that's not the main focus of what I do with tarot. I'm not there to be a show pony. I'm not there to give somebody a temporary thrill of like, hey, I knew this about you. If that happens, then that's part of the organic nature of what tarot reading is all about, when you connect with somebody energetically like that. But the main focus of the reading for me is to posit my spiritual counselling techniques and to help the client with guidance and with building a positive future for themselves, etc. So that's really where I go with it. And when you're very open and honest about the fact that you provide those kinds of readings, then it's very unlikely that you're going to have a client coming back at you and saying, I didn't understand anything, because they've already provided to you the foundation of what they need the reading to be about and how they need tarot to help them. I knew that my answer to this question was going to get convoluted, so I decided to use Ruth Ann Amberstone's book, Tarot Tips, and just read you a little couple of passages from it so I can give you an idea of what I mean. Many people who consult readers do so from the conviction that the cards have a power of their own, and a good reader is in tune with that power. For querents like these, the ordinary talents of perceptiveness, card knowledge, empathy and compassion are irrelevant. All that counts is the psychic miracle, and if a reader cannot produce, or at least appear to produce this miracle, the querent will feel cheated. It is best for both querent and reader in such a case to be upfront about what the reader is and is not prepared to do. Of course, there are many readers who actually prefer that the querent not ask any questions or say anything until after the reading. I'll skip that bit, it's not important. To get the most out of a reading session, I personally believe questions should be clarified as much as possible and a meaningful dialogue carried on throughout the reading. I make it clear to the querent before I begin that this is how I read. I tell them that the more specific they can be, the deeper we can go and the more helpful the reading will be to them. If the occasion warrants it, I also explain that I am not there to put on a show. The analogy of doctor and patient comes to mind here. Imagine a patient who refuses to tell the doctor what's wrong on the grounds that the doctor, if he's any good, should be able to figure it out. That always seems to me like a great waste of valuable time. I really like that doctor-patient analogy, and I think it's one that you can level at any person that wants a reading from you if they kind of try to withhold information so that they can later reserve the right to say that nothing made any sense. Maybe they're testing you, maybe they just have different expectations of tarot than you. Some people really want to go in for that psychic angle. Other people want tarot for self-development, tarot for path working and strategy and so on. It really depends what you're there for. And recently I had somebody tell me that this came up for them as part of a tarot lesson. All of the students were asked to do a quick reading on each other, and the student that this person read for kind of turned around and said, well, none of that made any sense to me. But the difficulty with there is that in a group setting, everybody that's come to the lesson will have a different expectation when it comes to tarot. They'll have a different idea of what tarot is for. Some of them will be looking to develop their psychic ability, and some of them will be looking to use tarot as an extra modality alongside psychotherapy or counselling, or just generally being a listening ear. Everybody has a different idea of what tarot is useful for and what tarot should be used for. So often if you're in a group setting, something like that might happen. But with regard to a client turning around and saying, I didn't understand anything, it's really important to be clear about the kind of readings that you give first of all. If you are the kind of reader that you feel can just pull things out of a bag and not know anything about the client, and it's all very much about showcasing your psychic ability for money, then you should feel very comfortable doing that. If that's not what you do, and you feel that that actually denigrates what you are able to do with tarot, then you need to lay that on the line right away. You need to be honest and upfront about it. I am, and it means that there's a lot of hot water that I don't actually end up getting myself into. Question 2, how can I deal with negative feedback? I would say that you need to deal with it obviously with grace and diplomacy, but also in the spirit of shadow work as well. The first thing that it's important to remember when you get negative feedback from a tarot client of yours, or from someone that you did a reading from, is that some of the things that you touch on when you are helping somebody with their issues are going to be the kind of things that that person is not ready to take on board yet. They're not going to be ready to see the full picture. They're perhaps not going to be ready to listen to some of the truths that you've put out there, or to consider some of the tougher questions that you've laid on the table for them. So they might kind of react defensively, they might react angrily, they might kind of shut down and decide to project onto you any anger or worry or frustration that they have about what you're bringing up for them. So sometimes negative feedback can come out of you almost doing your job too well, or the client not yet being ready to kind of dismantle and examine what's come up in the reading. But the second important thing to remember is that that's not always the case, and I think a lot of tarot readers can get very complacent with this idea that anytime they get negative feedback, it's because the client can't handle the overarching truth that came out in the reading. That's not always the case. Sometimes you might have not explained what you were going to do properly. You might find that one of your descriptions for a tarot reading that you were selling or putting out there as something that you could do kind of gave across a different impression to the querent that purchased it. That happened to me once. I felt like I'd really explained from the description exactly what the tarot reading was geared towards, but the client kind of came back to me and said, well, no, I kind of thought that you were going to delve into this and this. And then I've taken that on the chin and I've really looked at the description on my Etsy shop and rewritten it so that it makes a lot more sense, it's a lot more clear. So sometimes it's about you not explaining correctly what was going to happen. Sometimes you might need to look through the reading and decide that there were places where you either were too blunt or you weren't specific enough.Maybe you didn't offer enough advice. Maybe you were perhaps focusing too much on the negative, not enough on the positive. But these are things that you really need to work through yourself. When somebody offers you feedback which is less than glowing, they're not normally going to sit there and dissect every single paragraph in the reading and tell you where exactly it was that they were unhappy. Sometimes you just need to simmer down, relax, understand that there's always something that you can learn from feedback that was less than great, and read through everything that you wrote or kind of think back over everything that you said and decide for yourself what the key points are there for you in terms of learning, in terms of doing better next time, in terms of ensuring that that kind of thing doesn't come up again. And I think thirdly, dealing with negative feedback is always about doing a little bit of shadow work. It's always about taking it in. Make sure that you don't just immediately deflect or project back. Make sure that you're always willing to take a look at how you can improve and how you can learn, because you should always be gracious as a listening helper and as a tarot reader. You should always be gracious. You should always be willing to take a look at where you can smooth your own corners and where you can make yourself into a much better tarot reader and a clearer channel and a more empathetic channel for the people that come to you. But yeah, that first point does still stand. Sometimes people find it difficult to accept what you have to say. Also, sometimes things that you mention in a tarot reading might not have come to pass yet, or they might not be as relevant yet. I cannot tell you the amount of times I've had people say that 3 months after a tarot reading from somebody, or 6 months after a tarot reading from somebody, it suddenly made sense. And it's happened to me too. I got a tarot reading from somebody and it didn't seem to be really relevant to my situation, and then I read it a couple of months later and it was the most nurturing thing that I had ever read, because everything that she had mentioned, that she had asked me to prepare for, that she had kind of put into the mix, had come to pass. So it was a really good thing in the end. Number 3, any confidence boosting tips? Yes, practice. Practice a lot. Practice in front of a mirror, practice with friends, practice on your own and in group settings. Go onto Eclectic Tarot, use the exchanges forum. You know, even if it's just very quick 1-card exchanges, or you want to do a 1-card reading for feedback, you can leave a post in that forum that says, I'm going to do 10 1-card readings for feedback. And the people in the exchanges forum are really, really good. They will let you give them a 1-card reading and they will give you their honest feedback. They will let you know what they think you should change, what they thought was great about the reading. So it's all pretty anonymous and comfortable, but you're going to get the benefit of a lot of kind of tarot readers and tarot enthusiasts that have a lot of insight and have done this a lot of times. So that's always a good thing. Start a tarot blog, showcase your tarot knowledge. Become part of the community. That's really good for building confidence, I think. I think I was pretty confident before I started the YouTube channel, but now I'm kind of even more willing to talk about it and exchange with people, and I'm more excited, I'm more enthusiastic, so I've got less hang-ups. Also, play to your strengths. In positive psychology, there's a big belief that it's much more important to identify where your strengths are and start pushing most of your energy towards your strengths than it is to identify where your weaknesses are and try and build on your weaknesses. You know, we're always going to have certain weak points, and that's fine. You know, we will give a certain degree of our energy to helping those weak points to have a more stable foundation beneath them. But if we really look at where our key strengths are, what we really excel at with tarot, and put the majority of our energy towards that, that's really going to build confidence quickly. Question 4, the best ways to memorise card meanings. Okay, first of all, I would say 1 card, 1 word is a great exercise. You can do it as many times as you want. I'm actually going through the whole deck again at the moment on my Facebook Four Queens page, just going through 1 card, 1 word each day. That is so helpful, and you will find that there's always 1 word that you stick with, you know, like the magician will always be imagination, or the fool will always be potential, or the high priestess will always be insight, and you can stick with that 1 word, and that 1 word will always come up. You will connect it with that card. So that's always a really useful thing. The other thing that I would say, and this takes a lot more time, this is kind of a lot less of a snappy technique and much more of a long-winded thing where you need to really put the time and the commitment in. Path working, meditating with the cards, spending a really good amount of time with each card is one of the ways to deepen and strengthen your core knowledge of each card, so that when you turn that card over, you have an absolute foundation knowledge, you have a little index, you have shelves that you can pluck different ingredients from. It's really about bonding with the card. It's really about getting to know the card. I know that sounds like a hell of a lot of hard work and it's such a drag, and why can't I just buy a microchip that goes in there and I remember all of the meanings, but no, that really is the best way, spending time with each card. Question 5, I'm having trouble with one particular suit. I don't gel with it. Any advice? Yes, I used to have this problem with the suit of Pentacles, and what I realised, this is the key tip, there are many tips I could give you for this, but this is just one key tip. If you find that there's a particular suit in tarot that you do not gel with, that you just can't bond with, that you just can't really crack, it's normally because whatever the suit tends to represent is the kind of thing that you haven't yet gelled with in your own life. So for example, for me with the suit of Pentacles, the suit of Pentacles is very often about the material realm, the earthly realm, so we're talking about tangible results and tangible goals. It's also about the mind-body connection, it's about the 5 senses, it's about sensuality, but it's about stability, it's about fertility, it's about building. It's a very real world, hands dirty kind of suit, and that is the kind of thing, all the kind of themes and concepts that I used to have more trouble with when I was younger. I'm actually very airy-fairy, and I'm actually about words, and I'm about intellect. I'm more of a swords and wands kind of girl. So the suit of Pentacles, what I realised about it is that it was trying to tell me something about myself. My aversion to it was actually a clue that a lot of the things that are represented by the suit of Pentacles are things that I hadn't really gotten my head around in my own life. And it's amazing how quickly a suit will click in your mind once you've recognised that your aversion to it is really about something within you. And that is why working with tarot actually helps you so tremendously with your own sense of self-knowledge, with your own sense of self-development. It makes you thrive, it makes you excel, it makes you accelerate and flourish. Because every single time you troubleshoot a suit or shoot a card, you recognise that the problems that you're having with the card are the problems that you're having within. And the more you work to resolve and explore and examine those problems you're having within, the more you can actually relate to the suit that you're having an issue with. Like, I used to hate the Nine of Pentacles. I wanted to kill that bitch. And now I totally understand. The reason I had an aversion to her was because I thought I could never be her. I couldn't connect to her energy within me. And I worked on that, and I worked on that, and now I love the Nine of Pentacles. What can I say? Question number 6. Any tips for memorising numerology? Okay. Now, the way that I work with numerology, I'm aware that numerology has a very kind of close and intense relationship with the major arcana. I'm not going to go into that now because it would make this video very long and complex, but I will explain the numerology of the major arcana, and I will explain in another video how you work out things like your birth card, which is another question I'm asked quite a lot of the time. What I am going to go through is just discussing the meaning of 1 to 10 on the minor arcana, the pips. Now, if you go to my trainee tarot course and you have a look at the video which explains elements and numbers in the minor arcana, you're going to get an overarching understanding of what I mean by the numbers 1 to 10 in the minor arcana. They each mean a different thing. I would recommend very strongly that if you are interested in the answer to this question and you haven't yet seen that video in my trainee tarot course, go to it. It's going to be a very good use of your time. However, just to boil this down briefly, number 1s, so the aces in tarot tend to mean the all or the one. So it's the potential, it's the primordial soup, it's the beginning, okay? So if you use the word all or the word one or maybe the word potential, that's going to help you whenever an ace comes up. Number 2s in tarot are normally about duality, balance or choice. So pick one of those 3 words and that's going to give you some kind of suggestion for what the number 2s generally mean in tarot. Number 3s are about foundation most of the time. The way I always encourage people to remember it is a 3-legged stool. When a stool has 3 legs is the point where it can be freestanding. It's the point where it actually can stand up on its own. So what we're really thinking about with 3s is foundation. And the 4s in tarot should be thought of as building, because now we've got 4 legs instead of 3. So we've strengthened our foundation and we're ready to build. 5s, I would go with the word conflict. The 5s in tarot are always about a time of testing or conflict. And number 6, you should go maybe for the word aftermath, because we're really looking at the aftermath of that conflict. We're looking at what's there once the dust settles. And then number 7 should be growth or potentially lesson, because we're looking at what really has developed since that aftermath kind of came into being. Number 8, I would go for the word metamorphosis or maybe for the word motion. If you look at all of the 8s in tarot, you'll notice that they all in some sense contribute to the word metamorphosis or the word motion. Number 9 should be reflection or contemplation, maybe gestation. It's where, once again, the dust settles and you kind of work out what you've got and what you've lost. And then number 10 should be completion or finish. If you kind of connect these words to these numbers, then you're never going to have too much of a difficult issue with understanding what the numerology kind of relates to in tarot. Number 7, which spreads have you done for yourself which made a big impact on you? In Kim Huggins' Tarot 101, there is a really interesting spread called What Kind of Reader Are You?, which kind of encourages you to look into what kind of tarot reader you are, what your strengths are, what you can improve on. That spread was really good for me. Ian Eshe also has a really great spread in his book, Tarot Spreads for Love, Career and More, I think it's called. Yeah. I'll post a link to the Amazon purchase option below. Ian was kind enough to send me a copy of the book before it was officially released, and I had a chance to use some of the spreads and see how I went with them. There's one spread which is all about working from home. It's about the pros and cons of working from home and what you might need to do to facilitate that and to get it lucrative for you as an option. That was a really good spread. I found that that really cut to the heart of the matter quite a lot. Also, I celebrate the 8 points on the Pagan Wheel of the Year, and sometimes when I'm in the circle, I do tarot readings for myself during those 8 Sabbats, and they are always very illuminating. They're always very informative, very in depth. I get a lot of insight at those specific times because I'm in the mood to be reflective, because I'm in the mood to really take a look at the symbolism and the meaning behind the symbolism. So I tend to find that if I read my own cards at Sabbats, it normally goes pretty well. Number 8, what if the cards in a spread seem to be about finances when the question is about romance? Okay, that is a very good question. I tend to find most of the time that if you are asking a question about romance and you've got your tarot cards laying out and you feel that all of these overwhelming messages to do with finance are coming out at you and you're thinking, no, I'm asking a question about my romantic life, why is all this stuff coming up about finances? Two things could potentially be happening here. The first is that you have underestimated the all-encompassing nature of each suit and each card in each suit. The second thing that could be happening is that you are actually focusing on the wrong issue, and that your subconscious mind is rattling your cage and saying, you don't need to think about your love life right now, you need to think about money, or you need to think about work. With the first thing, it's normally a problem for people, for example, if a lot of cards from the suit of Pentacles come up in a reading about love, because people are expecting a lot of cards from the suit of Cups to come up because it's about human relationships and water is about the emotional spectrum, etc. But that's actually a huge misconception. Pentacles do have as much to say about love as they have to say about money, but we're thinking about the pragmatic part of it, or maybe the sensual part of it, maybe the earthbound part of it, maybe the bodily part of it, the physical side of it. You've got to think about what the suit of Pentacles pertains to and then filter that through love and see what that would look like, okay? It's not the case at all that Pentacles are to do with work, health and money, and Cups are to do with love and relationships. That's not true. Every single card can make a comment on any single query that you have. You just need to filter it through that word. So filter the suit of Pentacles through the word love and see what that would look like. It would probably look like, for example, the more rational side of love or the more pragmatic side of love. Maybe you need to be more objective in matters of love, or maybe you have issues with the physical side, or maybe it's to do with distance, maybe it's to do with plans to move in, plans to move out, that kind of thing. There are many different ways in which that kind of pragmatic, objective, rational, earthy feeling of the energy of Pentacles can really filter through into your love question and give you a lot of meat on that bone. That second thing I talked about, where you are asking tarot about a love query and you're getting all these messages about money, I would suggest listening to those messages. I would suggest that perhaps it's a message from your unconscious mind that you're focusing your attention and your energy in the wrong place, and that this is a prime opportunity for you to actually look at a different aspect of your life and look at the energies and the answers and the questions that could be flowing through for you in that aspect of your life. I think it's really a strong message from the mind to the heart, and I think it's the kind of thing that should be listened to. Number 9, how can I memorise meanings for multiple decks? Okay, well, I only work with the Rider-Waite. I have messed around with other decks in the past, of course, so I do feel that I have some handle on how to answer this. What I would say is that I work from the premise that there is a universal, standardised, accepted definition for each card, and that definition could really be as all-encompassing as one word. Like I mentioned earlier in this video about using one word to kind of give you your anchor for the card and then branch out from there as a way to memorise. I would say that the universal standardised definitions kind of always encompass one word. So across most decks of 78 cards that you will find that are labelled tarot, you are going to find that the Magician, or you know, the wizard or whatever they're calling it. The magician is going to be to do with power, will, potential, desire for something to happen, manifestation. And you will normally always find that, for example, the hermit or the sage in some decks, whatever it's called, will always pertain to themes of introspection and spiritual evolution and isolation and necessary isolation and so on. So what we're looking at there is we're looking at these universal accepted definitions, and the nuances are going to change dependent upon the deck that they're a part of, and dependent upon the illustration, and dependent upon the imagery that's being used. So if you've worked out what that overarching universal accepted definition of a card is, then you are laughing, because you can look at 6, 7, 8 different hermit cards from 8 different decks, and you can say, okay, I understand what the overarching meaning of the hermit is. I've got that in mind. Now what I can do is I can filter that meaning through all of the different illustrations and colours and symbols and motifs of these different decks, and I can see where certain parts of the message are amplified and certain parts of the message ebb away. You know, the hermit in this deck is going to have a slightly different energy, a different feel, a different sense of urgency to the hermit maybe in this deck. So really what you're doing is you're playing with colour and you're playing with potential. You're like an artist in that sense. The only important thing to do before you start messing around with like 5, 6 different decks is to understand what the overarching or the universal accepted definition of each card is. And that, as I said, can be as simplistic as one word. But once you've got that one word down and you've got a handle on what it really means, you can look at a million different images of the Fool or the Magician or the High Priestess, and you can feel comfortable that you know what the core fundamental keystone is, but you can dress it up with all of these wonderful different guises from these different decks. And that's why so many readers who work with so many different decks actually choose different decks that they favour to work with for different things. So they might choose to work with one specific deck for questions about love, or they might get a specific querent come to them and say, I have this question, and they'll tune into the energy and they'll be like, you know what, I've got just the deck for you, because you get used to the different energies and the different messages of each deck, and they come to kind of feel differently for you and hold different meanings for you. So it's really enriching working with so many different decks, but it's good to have the universal definition down first so you don't feel completely lost. And finally, is the Crowley Thoth deck different from an ordinary deck? I've been asked this a few times. Okay, Crowley's deck is different in a few different ways. Firstly, some of the trumps in the major arcana have been renamed. I'm not going to remember all of them now off the top of my head, but I know that temperance is art, and strength is lust, and I believe the world is called the universe. So there are some differences with the trump cards, and obviously they will have slightly different associations or meanings to them. Crowley has also heavily used the Kabbalistic tree of life, tree of life, as the kind of underlying symbolism and the underlying concept that he's really using. So when you're looking through all the pips in the minor arcana, you're going to be looking through their different references in accordance with the tree of life and looking at that Kabbalistic system. So the more that you work with Crowley's Thoth deck, the more you'll actually have an underlying understanding of the Kabbalistic tree of life and how it fits in with different ideas, different areas of mysticism, if you will. So yeah, he's using some different theories, he's using some different concepts. It looks like a tarot deck, and to all intents and purposes it is a tarot deck, but the meanings are different, and there's a certain way that he writes about the different cards. Like, for example, okay, here, I have to be careful because I've got a bad back. Tarot Mirror of Your Relationships by Gerd Ziegler is one book that I actually own that is more geared towards the Thoth deck. It just gives you a definition of each of the cards, but it's according more to the Thoth paradigm than to the general tarot paradigm. So you've got lust instead of strength and art instead of temperance. And these are absolutely beautiful meanings, very, very rich, very dense, very poetic, very much in keeping with how I'm sure Aleister Crowley would have liked the Thoth deck to be interpreted. So I do think that it's a great companion. The Thoth definitions and the discussion of what the Thoth deck means and the underlying messages are a great companion for people who read with an ordinary deck. They're only slightly different, you know, they still basically have the same themes and the same energies, but they're approached in a different way. And yes, the Kabbalistic tree of life is a prerequisite with the Thoth, whereas with other tarot decks it's more of an option. Okay, I'm going to do another Q&A video at some point soon. Next time I'm going to talk about a number of different things. I've got some questions about pricing for those who want to go into the professional side of things with tarot. I'm going to be troubleshooting some problem cards and letting people know different ways of reading problem cards, how to use tarot in magical workings, that kind of thing. So yeah, I have a lot more questions to answer and I will answer them forthwith. If you have anything that you would like to know from me and you've not asked yet, please leave your questions below and I will continue to add them to the ever-growing list. Much love.